Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Edinburgh Chamber webinar, New Paradigm of Time Management. If you can hear me, can you give me a little wave? I can see a few video screens. John, can you hear me? Give us a wave if you can hear me. Brilliant, excellent. We're going to make a start. We're due to have, I think it's 40 people logged on, but if there's a webinar you start on time, it's obviously one to do with time management. Because we've got 40 people that are booked on, I've muted everyone. The easiest way to get hold of me is to put something into the chat, and we'll pick it up from there. But what I'm going to do is to really get straight into the webinar. And to do that, I'll share my screen. The slides that I'll use here, Jimmy at the Chamber will email across to you copies of all of the slides. If you have got opportunity to make some notes, then please do so as you're going through. If you've got any questions, please put them into the group chat. Let's just share the screen. Okay, so the objective of the aim of the webinar was really to look at personal productivity, especially during the lockdown that I think we're all facing now. Thank you for if you've completed the poll, which indicates that I think 100% of people who are on this are working from home, and there's a mix of people who are on their own and with other people. Each person on this call or in this meeting is different. You've got different situations, and therefore a lot of what I'll be speaking about may seem quite generic. Just ask you, just have a little think about what it means to you. What does it mean to you, and how can you apply this in your own situation? So I'm going to end that poll in a couple of minutes, and there's another poll which I'll put up in a few seconds. But there's a new phrase really, which is called the new normal. And what is the new normal? Is this the normal? Working from home, not really getting into any form of the social contact with anyone. When or if, well, hopefully when this is all over in the months to come, are we really going to go back to the way we were? And a lot of organisations I know are really beginning to discuss now, do they need to go back to everyone going back into the office, for example? But also, there's certain rules working from home. It'd be really useful to implement, and there's going to be some of them where we're probably going to be asking, how did we allow ourselves to get into a position where we were constantly being distracted? How do we get to the stage where someone can send us an email and expect an answer immediately? How do we get to the stage where someone can just come up to us and tap us on the shoulder and say, I'd like to interrupt you? But they don't usually say that. They usually say something like, have you got a second? Have you got a minute, etc.? And what we speak about here is to get you to start thinking, when we move beyond the lockdown into more of a normal, it will be new. And how do you want that to be for you? Whether that's you're working from home and you usually work from home, or whether you're usually in an office and you quite like things to be different when you get back into the office, there is an opportunity to start exploring that now. So in terms of the polls, the first poll that I had was was about your current work situation, and I'm just about to close that one down now and share the results with you as they are. Okay, and which you're obviously seeing, and we've got let's just move that down. So in essence, the good news is here that of the people who've responded, everyone's got their own equipment for use, etc., which is good. If that isn't the case, we just need to build into the structure that we're going to have to share that with someone potentially. There's some people, with a lot of people who are around you. You're also going to have a lot more interruptions if you've got 3, 4, 5, 6 people living in the same place. It just requires more discipline. And it's going to require potentially having a conversation with people and maybe even sharing the content of this webinar with them. You'll get copies of the PDFs, go through it with them. And in many respects, that's third-party teaching, which helps us to learn and to integrate the learning anyway. And the bulk of us are working from home as well. So let's just close that down for now. So, what can you expect today? Well, there's no magic wands. I'm sure that a lot of people would quite like all of the issues to just disappear, and to really be so it's like a panacea that you just have a magic wand, everything disappears. It's not going to happen. But what you can expect is some tools and techniques to help you get in control. As I say, there's going to be a lot of information, so take some notes, and a copy of the slides will be emailed out to you as well. So here's some quotations on time, and they're all from popular culture, from television and film. And just see, I think certainly within the UK, you may well be able to work out someone's age or certainly a generation by which of these they actually remember. So the first one, time is an abstract concept. This is a wristwatch. The second one, people assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually from a non-linear, non-subjective point of view, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. And then the last one, mysterious thing, time, powerful, but when meddled with, it's dangerous. Now, if you can if you know any of those, and I'll just put up who each of these are. The first one was from a BBC series in the 1980s called The Young Ones, and the second you may have recognised was Doctor Who from the BBC television series, and then the third one, Professor Dumbledore in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry Potter 3. The key thing with this is that different people have got different views of time, and anyone who has ever been to see a film that you found excruciatingly boring, you'll realise that it appears at times that time can actually travel quite slower than at times when maybe we're enjoying ourselves. So we've got to be thinking that in terms of time, the simple message is it's just there. We can't manage it. It's what we do with the passing of time that's most important. And the purpose of today is to move really from thinking about how do we manage time, because we can't, into more of the how do we actually manage productivity. So this webinar was called The Paradigm of a New Paradigm of Time Management, and have a couple of definitions for paradigm and for time management. The first one comes from a book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. If you have read that, then you'll recognize this. If you haven't read it, then it's a great concept. However, the book is quite challenging to read. It was written as an academic thesis. However, his son has written a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teenagers. It's much easier to read, and all of the concepts are much easier to explained in there. It's also more up to date, includes a lot of stuff on social media. It's not just for teenagers; it's for everyone. Although if you have got teenage children, or teenage children who would benefit from that, it's a good little stocking filler for them, or birthday present. But his view was that paradigms represent our view of the world, our explanation for what we observe in the world around us. In essence, it's what we see, and we don't actually believe what we see what we believe. We look at things through this paradigm, and if we can actually start to change the way we see the world, then we can actually start to get some different results. So in terms of time management, I've got a couple of definitions here. The first one's from the Oxford English Dictionary: the ability to use one's time effectively or productively, especially at work. And just so we're not favouring one of the universities over another, the Cambridge Dictionary has got the practice of using the time that you have available in a useful and effective way, especially at work. Now, they say the same things in different ways apart from the last 3 words or the last part of the sentence, which is especially at work. And it's as though time management outside of work doesn't matter. It's if we now can compartmentalize our lives into, we're going to be structured and controlled in one part of our life, but not in another. And that's really where the new paradigm comes in. It's about saying this is about controlling everything in your life. Not just thinking about when I'm working, I'll be controlled, I'll be structured, or when I'm in my home life, I'll be controlled and I'll be structured. It's actually thinking there is such an overlap between home life and work life now, especially during the lockdown. But even before that, the introduction of technology has meant that we're potentially at beck and call 24 hours a day. Now, some countries, France, for example, a couple of years ago brought in a law which said that that after a certain time at night, I think it was 7 or 7:30 at night, then employers could not be expected to expect anyone to answer emails, and a lot of people would switch it off. For a lot of people that worked. For other people, it was an absolute nightmare. I think that we have to understand that there is going to be a mix. When we're at work, we will be thinking about things happening in our personal lives. When we're at home, we will be thinking about things in our work lives. So this is really about how do we understand everything. And Stephen Covey's 7 Habits has got some fantastic quotes in it. And one of his quotes is, if you want small changes, work on your behavior, just do things differently, work smarter, work harder, get your head down, etc. But if you want quantum leap change, if you want those big changes, we've got to work on our paradigms. We've got to work on our beliefs. We've got to work on the way we see the work before we start working on the actual practice itself. So the new paradigm is really that time management isn't just about work, it's about your whole life. And our focus, it really shouldn't be on trying to manage time, as I said, but on being more productive, more efficient, and more effective. So productivity sits in the middle of efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency is doing things quickly, and effectiveness is doing things properly, doing them well. There is very little point in doing things really, really quickly and finding you're not getting the result you're looking for. But at the same time, there's not really any point in spending so much time to get something to be absolutely perfect when maybe the customer isn't expecting that, or especially if a customer isn't paying for that. I'm all for people having high standards. I think we should all set high standards. And if we can find a way of delivering our work and doing everything to a higher standard without it costing us any more money, then that's a big win, because customers will want that. But very few customers are going to want to necessarily allow you to spend whatever time you want on something and then put a bill through to say, I spent this amount of time. And certainly a lot of the work I've done in the last 12 months has been with legal firms. And one of the challenges, and all professional services as well, one of the challenges they're facing is that customers are asking for more of a fixed price rather than we will do work and then we'll invoice you what we've done. And that fixed price is fine if you can actually spend less on delivering it from a business point of view. But we've got to be very careful we don't actually spend £10,000 on delivering a service for the customer and only charge them £5,000. So this is very much about productivity. How do we become more productive? And today we're going to look at some ways to become more productive, but also explore some of those little things that get in the way and stop us from being as productive as we can be. So top tips are working from home, and we'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. The first thing is retain a focus on your priorities. We've got to know what our priorities are. Regular routines, get into some regular routines. We are creatures of habit. We like things to happen in certain ways and certain times. And we've got to reduce, if not eliminate, but certainly reduce the amount of distractions we have. And I'd say in maybe 3 months' time, 6 months' time, we get into a little bit more of a new normal. These can be top tips just for working. It's not just about working from home. So if we look through these, first of all, focusing on priorities. If you've read the 7 Habits, you'll have seen that this model, the 4-quadrant model, comes from that book. It's in a lot of other time management books and personal productivity books as well. And it's based on the number of quadrants, and it really speaks about, is something important, is something urgent? And this is a summary of it, really, where we really should be working on anything that's important. And that's, so it's like, there is a question there, which is, how do we decide whether something is important or not? It can be a difficult thing to understand, but importancy and urgency are different. Urgency is, it's got to be done now, it's got to be done today, and importance is that it's important to us, it's going to make a difference. If we don't do it, there are going to be some negative consequences. If we do it, then there will be some positive consequences. A lot of the time, in terms of the way of work, we can have some conflict there. What's important to other people who we're working with or for might not be as important to us as it is to them. Hence, people can get to the stage of, I need this information now so that I can deliver my work. So I'm just going to go and interrupt somebody else so that I can get the information without necessarily thinking about what the impact is on other people. What we need to be thinking about here is really the quadrant on quadrant 1. What is urgent and important? It's a necessity. We've got to do it now. And quite a lot of work will be in that box. And also in quadrant 2. Diarising it for the future if you've got a good diary system. But it's about productivity. It's about doing things that are important before they become urgent. We have to make sure we avoid the 2 boxes at the bottom as much as we can. Quadrant 3 can seem urgent. It's really a distraction. It seems like we need to do things immediately, but it's not important. If we do them or don't do them, it's not going to make a difference to us, really. And for those, we either find somebody else to do it, in terms of delegating it to someone whose role it should be potentially, or we reject it. We reject it diplomatically. And there's a difference between rejecting diplomatically and deleting. Deleting is just get rid of it. And I'll give you an example. Running up to Christmas last year, I was invited, as I'd imagine everyone on this call was invited to a number of Christmas parties. And if the invitation was a generic, we're having a do at this venue, if you fancy coming, please come, etc., let us know you're coming. If I'm not going to go to that, I'll make a decision very early. I know what my diary is. If I'm not going to go to that, then I'll just delete it. You know, it isn't a personal invitation. It's just been sent to me as a round robin. It's gone to a lot of people. And so basically, I'll just delete that. However, if I get a personal invitation, dear Bryan, we're holding an event at this venue. Would you be interested in coming? Then at that stage, then, yeah, I will. If I can't go, then I will reject that diplomatically. I'll send a reply saying, thank you for the invite, but I can't make it. And I'll make that decision quickly, because I don't want to be looking at it the same thing 5 or 6 times before I make a decision, which I knew what the decision was going to be all the way through. So these 4 Ds in the bold at the bottom of the diagram here, do it now, diarize, delegate, and delete. They're 4 things that we can actually look at every piece of work we have, especially email. I'll look a little bit of email right at the end of this, but especially with email, then we should actually be saying, can we do it now? Something short, sharp, get it out the way and get the email out of our inbox. If we can't do it now, say someone's asked for some information which you're not going to be able to do until, say, the back end of next week at the end of the month, then we diarize that. We have a system, we get it out of our inbox, we diarize to do it at some point in the future. If it's in something that we don't have to do, but someone else could do that, then we delegate to someone. We may need to train them in that, but we certainly pass it on to somebody else to deal with, or we delete. Certainly in terms of emails, I've done priority training for a number of years now, and around about 50% of emails that you'll get, probably more than 50% of items through the post now, you can immediately delete or file away. Okay, it doesn't actually mean that you've deleted it and it's gone forever. What it means is you've put it away and it's not going to distract you. So what you're working on is all the new stuff coming forwards, and you have a diary system that you've actually put something in for on a certain day. You then start to look at it. So we've got to be very aware of how we spend our time in each of these boxes, and typically, if we focus on our priorities, then important and urgent items are things like crises, emergency meetings, last minute deadlines, pressing problems. We're always going to have them. And depending on your role, you could actually be in a very, very much a high part of your role is in there. Certainly if you're in a customer service role, a reactionary customer service role, you're going to spend a lot of time in there answering the call, dealing with things that come through. But a lot of the time when we're running our businesses and when we're working our businesses, we've got to be thinking that we're working on the business as well as working in the business, a phrase you'll have heard. And therefore, we've got to be thinking about scheduling time for proactive work, thinking about things ahead of time. In fact, an example of that would be doing this training webinar today. I very much doubt that anyone here is going to be in serious, serious trouble if they don't attend it today. You know, there are other ways of getting this learning, but it's something that all the webinars, all the training and learning would go into something that is, it's not urgent, but it is important. High impact goals. If you know what your goals are, then the ones that can have the highest impact, put the work in as early as you can. Planning, prevention, building relationships with people. And that is totally different to gossiping. Okay, building relationships with people is about understanding them, getting to know them so that they can get to know you as well, and also all forms of learning and renewal. Now, a lot of people spend a huge amount of time in those areas. We've got to do is make sure we spend the right amount of time in there. But if we want more, we've got to look at the bottom 2 boxes, the orange and the red. Needless interruptions. Depending on the number of people who are in your property when you're on lockdown, will dictate how many interruptions you get. And the ones we talked about here are needless ones where people could have got the information or they could have been done at a different time. It could be unnecessary reports. It is amazing how many people that I speak to now are saying that that since they've been working from home, they've really considered what they're spending their time on and seeing things that they've been doing for maybe a long time, and suddenly saying, do we need to continue doing them? Irrelevant meetings. When I was working in the corporate world about 16, 17 years ago now, I had got to the stage where it was about 95% of my time. We had it was before we used Outlook. But there was a diary system and people could block time out in your own diary. And I had 95% of my time between the hours of 9 to 5 were blocked out for meetings. And I had to do all the other work before that time or after that time. And most of those meetings were irrelevant. We'll speak about some little things you can do about meetings right at the end as well, because emails and meetings are the biggest time wasters. But I would certainly encourage you to be thinking about, if using things like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Google Hangouts, whichever system you choose to use, if you're a little bit more controlled, a little bit more, I suppose, like aware of how much time you're spending on them and reducing those times, please, when we get back to the new normal, don't go back to just going to every single meeting. Meetings are the place where you can save a huge amount of time. It could be other people's minor issues, which usually come through as interruptions, unimportant emails, unimportant tasks, unimportant phone calls, and unnecessary status reports. One of the, I suppose, like the catalysts for me looking at leaving the corporate world and setting up a business on my own was the amount of time I was aware I was saying to my bosses, if you just stop asking me for a status report, I can actually get on and do the work. And if that resonates with you, then we've got to be thinking, how do we actually get those status reports together? So from a project management point of view, for example, I use weekly status reports. And if ever anybody emails me or calls me and says, what's the latest status on this report? My immediate response to them is, have you read the latest status report? And if they haven't, it's just go back to that. So it's not a question of not reporting the status, it's the interruption that stops you from performing at your best. And the red box, real things to stop, trivial work, things you shouldn't be doing at all, avoidance activities, there's lots of opportunities for doing those, I'd imagine, at the moment, excessive relaxation or excessive television, excessive gaming, excessive internet, lots of different time wasters, and also gossiping about people, which is different than trying to help someone solve a problem, of course. So if we look at how much time we typically spend in each quarter, there's a book and an audio book called The 5 Choices, written by Kogan, Merrill, and Ryan. And they did a lot of studies in America and Western Europe and found that the general people were spending their time split like this: just over a quarter in quadrant 1, just less than a third in quadrant 2, another quarter in quadrant 3, and 18%, maybe 1 in 5, 1 in 6 of our hours spent on things that we shouldn't be doing. So if that is typical, then we need to start looking at where should we look at to try and save some time, which is obviously the red box, and trying to reduce the amber box as well. The next figure is how much time we should spend in each quarter. Are really they're going to be totally different depending on the job you're in. If you're in frontline customer service, if you're working in the health service at the moment, if you're working in the police service, anything like that, you're going to be purely reactionary, I would imagine, for a considerable period of time, which is very stressful because you're just running from one event to another without really thinking about a potential planning. But we don't all work in those areas, and typically you need to think about what your role is, but I would see something like this as being something to aim for. Just over a third of our time being spent on important and urgent tasks. So if we're working, say 9 hours on a typical day, we're looking around about 3 hours of time is stuff that we have to do now. There's no other option, and it's really important. 55% should be unimportant and not urgent. That is things that we don't have to do now, but we've decided to because we think doing them early will put us into a better position. Planning. Long-term planning, short-term planning, doing some sort of training, some sort of learning, etc. And 10%, we're not going to be able to get rid of the urgent and not important items. Unfortunately, it'd be lovely if we could, but sometimes it's easier just to do them than it is to get rid of them. So we'll give 10%, maybe 3/4 an hour to an hour of a working day. And there's going to be a number of mathematicians in the room, and therefore you'll be able to work out how much time you can actually spend in the red box. And it's not difficult, it's 0. We want to eliminate that. So in terms of where to look, there's not really much point in looking to say, how can I do this report, and instead of taking an hour, I'm going to spend 50 minutes on it. That'd be good, but there's lots of other things which are getting in the way of this in those red boxes, which is worth looking at, things that aren't important to you and aren't urgent to you. And I was in fact coaching someone earlier this week about time management, and I got them to read out, got them to do a journal and to record everything they spent their time on for 2 days. That was all it was. It was 2 days of their choice. And they chose a Wednesday and Thursday of last week. And on Thursday, they put down that at 2 o'clock, they stopped work, went on to BBC iPlayer and watched EastEnders. And I said, that's interesting. Is that urgent or is it important? And they said, well, it's both. And I said, why is it both? And they said, well, I had to watch it because I know that somebody in my family is going to speak to me about it, so I need to know about that. And also I had to watch it then. And neither of those were true. You know, because it was on the iPlayer, you can watch it for at least 28 days. It may be longer now. I don't know how long things are left on the iPlayer, but it's at least 28 days you could spend watching that. And quite frankly, unless you're doing a degree in the character changes and the difficulties there are in the East End of London by watching EastEnders, to be honest, it's never going to be important to watch EastEnders. Now, having said that, relaxation, maybe with the family, watching something you all enjoy watching, that is important. That's something that should go down as important. But we shouldn't just be turning everything into, well, it's on television now, I have to watch it. We choose where we spend our time. And that person chose, in my opinion, unwisely. And when we worked out how much time they spent watching soap operas, etc., it went a long way to try to generate this 1.5 to 2 hours a week that they were looking for. So if we're looking for spare time, we look in box 4, not urgent and not important. Once we've got our priorities set, we've got to get into regular routines. We're all creatures of habit, as I say, and the routines you have will depend on your working from home situation. Certainly, the poll that we ran earlier clearly had a bias towards people who are working from home, and people had the equipment. But if you haven't got that, you've got to work out a schedule. Whatever happens, you've got to have a plan. Now, begin with the end in mind is a phrase from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's one of the first habits that are there to really get you to start thinking, well, what is the plan? What is the plan for tomorrow? And this is something you can actually start doing immediately. You can actually start this now. Now, I know we've got some people coming in from America here. I know you're 5-6 hours behind us here, but you can do this a little bit later today. Start with what time you're going to get up tomorrow. Start thinking, what time will you actually get up tomorrow? Not what time you'll set the alarm for. Setting an alarm is just an opportunity for people to use snooze, etc. But what time do you want to get up tomorrow? Now, whether that's 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, whatever it is, have that time in mind and stick to it. Stick to getting up at that time. It'll set your day off to a good start because you've actually made a commitment and you've stuck to it. And once you've got that together, you've got a time, get a piece of paper and a pen and just write down the following. Write down tomorrow, 22nd of April, 2020, I will get out of bed at. Now, I'm not going to judge you if you put a time which ends with PM at the end of it or after lunchtime, but you may choose to judge yourself, okay? The fact is that once you've got that, put the time down, sign the piece of paper, make it so it's like a contract with yourself, and place the paper somewhere that you will see it. Okay. Now, if you're the sort of person who really uses snooze alarms, you then work backwards and say, well, if you said you're going to get out of bed at 7 o'clock, do you have to set the alarm for 7:15? Do you have to set the alarm for 6:30? Do you set the alarm for 6:15? Eventually, you want to be trying to get alarm going off, getting up as being the norm. But we've got to work towards that. Once we've got this private victory, this small private victory of getting up first thing tomorrow at the time, we said, then give yourself a pat on the back. You know, the fact is you've done that. Not everyone will do that. A lot of people have plans to do it, but won't actually get up. And one of the reasons for that is distractions or procrastination. Now, there's 2 types. If we said that regular routine is an important part of that, we will talk about how to structure a day, whether it's work or working from home. But distractions are going to get in the way. We said eliminating them is very important. We've got 2 types. We've got internal, which is ourselves. It's procrastination. It's our lack of focus. We've also got external, other people. And those other people, we have to be very careful when we're working from home that we don't end up with a situation where it's somebody who we spend a lot of time with. We're just saying, you can't interrupt me. That's not true. What we've got to do is have an adult conversation with them, even if it's for children. Children can understand about focusing and about when it is okay to have those conversations. So in terms of procrastination, I love this when I found it online. Procrastination is a definition, the action of ruining your life for no apparent reason. Saying you're going to do something and not doing it. Saying that you know you've got to go and do something, or you suspect you've got to go and do it, but you just don't do it. It doesn't make you feel good. It makes you actually realize that you're actually putting something off, and eventually you'll end up doing it. So why do we procrastinate? It's usually down to one of 7 things. And it's because we feel the task is boring. We feel it's frustrating. It's too difficult. Maybe it's ambiguous. We don't know what's expected. It's unstructured, so we don't know where to start. It's not any fun. or it's lacking in personal meaning. And I've put that one in bold because it's the most important one. The more meaning we can attach to something, the more reason we can have, it gives us a purpose. And you'll have heard of that phrase, having a sense of purpose. Once we have that sense of purpose, it becomes a lot easier, because if we procrastinate, then we feel guilty. If we feel guilty, eventually we'll start to get into a sense of panic. We'll make excuses for our reasons, and they are just excuses. We'll try maybe some form of rationalization. It's just an excuse, which makes us procrastinate even more. So how do we overcome it? Simple things, really. Understand your reason for doing, as we said. Give it some meaning. Give it the task and activity some personal meaning. If you can't think of a reason why you're doing it, you've got to ask yourself why you're doing it in the first place. Why didn't in the first place? Now, I've got a number of clients who I describe as pains in certain parts of your body, and there's certain times when I genuinely don't want to do any work for them. But I've got to look beyond, if you like, a relationship issue into what's it going to mean by doing this, and what's it going to mean if I don't do it as well. But by doing it, it means that I don't have to worry about having those difficult phone calls. I can get them over and done with. In essence, slave a giant when it's young. Deal with things when it's small, rather than waiting for them to go forwards. As well as having meaning, we get started like Steve Cram. Now, Steve Cram was a Olympic athlete, world champion and world record holder over middle distance, 1,500 meters, the mile, etc. He's now a coach, and he did a series of coaching videos. And one of the things he said was the biggest challenge for people when they're coaching in athletics is getting up earlier than many of us will, getting up 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning and going out for your run. Going out and doing the run, doing the work in the words of Muhammad Ali, getting all that training in when no one else can see you. And he says the most important thing is get up and get your shoes on. Because once you've got your shoes on, you're far less likely to want to get back into bed again. So when we start something, it's about starting it. It's about making sure that we get to the point where we say, okay, we are going to start this, but make it easy. Put the shoes out, get everything ready the night before, get yourself a good start. Secondly, make it more painful to procrastinate. If you find yourself procrastinating, just give yourself some sort of either literal or real punishment. I was working with someone who was putting off doing a report. It was on the run up to Christmas last year, and they were putting off doing a report. They knew they had to do it. They'd explained to me how important it was. They just didn't want to start. It was a blank sheet of paper, I suppose, a bit of writer's block that was there. And I said to him, okay, what's it going to mean if you don't do it? He said, there wasn't enough punishment. There'll be a degree of discomfort, but I feel pretty certain they'll give me an extension. Well, that's no good. If you feel there's going to be extensions, you're just going to carry on taking them. And so what I used was a strategy with them, which was about making it more painful, which was saying, okay, when do you want it done by? They came up with the answer was they wanted it done by December the 10th. And this is around about the middle of November. So they had 4 weeks to do it in. And it was a long report, but it was plenty of time if they could just structure the task. And I said to them, okay, so what is it you really, really want for Christmas? And they said to me, I really, really want a handbag. And I know which one it is. And it was from a designer store in Edinburgh. And I said, okay, is that something you think someone's going to buy you? Or is it a treat that you think you can give yourself if you get this report done on time? Because it was a pretty big report. It meant a lot to them. And they said, well, I could probably convince my husband to get it for me. If not, I get it for myself. And I said, and can you imagine yourself with that handbag? He said, absolutely. So I said, okay, so if you don't get the handbag, okay, what's the punishment? And they said, I just won't get there. So if I don't finish the report, I just won't get the handbag. And it wasn't enough. There was no emotion in there. It's just like, I'll get it later. It'll just come later on. So I actually asked them, is there a charity or a cause or something that you definitely would not want to contribute to? And they said, yes, there was. I won't say what it is, but they said, yes, there was. They explained it to me. And I said, okay, what I'd like you to do is to buy the handbag. Just go out and buy it now. Have it on display. Do not open it. Leave all the tags on. Leave everything there. Leave it in open view. And if by 10th of December you have not done this report, you have to go to that. And it was a charity. They didn't support. You have to go to that charity and give them the bag with the tags on and say, this is a gift for you to sell or auction. Now the bag was from a designer shop in Edinburgh. It was going to cost around about £750. And suddenly the thought of someone else having that bag for £750 was enough to make them take some action. So the key thing here is we've got to be thinking, if we don't do it, let's make the pain. Let's actually say there is a consequence to us of not doing it. But at the same stage, let's have something that we can give ourselves a pat on the back. It doesn't always have to be a handbag. It could be we're going to have a donut. We're going to have a biscuit. We're going to do this. We're going to finish 10 minutes earlier tonight. We're going to do something we enjoy. Whatever it is, make it so that if we don't do it, there is a consequence. A way to do this is to work in time chunks. Now, we look at this later on, but to do that, you're going to have to reduce the distractions that you can control. You can't control all of them, but about 90% of them you actually can. So how do we reduce distractions? Anyone who's done any form of lean thinking, lean management, etc., you 5S. In essence, you declutter your desk. You look at your desk and you sort everything. You set it in order. You make it shine. You standardize everything so you know where everything is, etc., and then you sustain it. You keep it going. So if you want to look that up, look up anything around lean thinking or 5S online, and that you'll get some help in there. Other things. Now, the next two are going to be ones people go, I can't possibly do that. But please, just get used to turning off your phone. Even if you don't like turning it off, switch it to airplane mode, switch it to do not disturb. Just stop the phone from ringing. People will always call back. You can call them back at a time as well. At the same time, close your emails. And even if you can't close your emails, stop the what I call the bells and whistles. The little sounds, the little pop-up windows, the little notifications that are enough to stop you working on your priority to focus on something which is probably a product that you don't want, that you're just going to delete the email. Because working from home is quite tough, we've got to agree a do not contact schedule. We need to make sure that people are aware of when we can and when we can't be contacted. That's why discussing this with people, going through this with people you live with at the moment is very useful. And when we get back to the new normal, discussing it with bosses, colleagues, etc., if you're back into an office environment at some point in the future. Don't answer the door. Especially at this time, if anyone is dropping something off, they don't stay there anyway. You know, they actually will just leave it on the front doorstep or take a photograph of it to prove that it was there, etc. But don't answer the door. You can also install a browser extension to block access. If you think that just going on and going on to the latest website, etc., you want to go to, you can actually use a browser extension. The one that I use is called Strict Workflow. And not only does it give you certain websites that say at certain times you can't access them. So for me, it's things like bbc.co.uk, YouTube, that sort of thing, where I can go in and think I can lie to myself that I'm only going to look at the headlines, and I actually end up looking way, way beyond that. And most of the stuff is just a repetition of things I already knew. There's nothing new that's coming up. So at certain times, I can actually block that, and Strict Workflow is the system that I use for that. And then it's about working in smaller chunks. We are creatures of habit, but we have a dreadful problem in terms of focusing for significant periods of time. Anyone who's had to go and do an exam lasting more than an hour, for example, will find how stressful it is, how tiring it is. There's certain ways we can approach that. And the time chunking system works on half-hour blocks, where 25 minutes is about working, and then 5 minutes is doing something else. I'll explain exactly what we mean by that. So how long can we focus for? We have an input. It's usually 20 plus minutes possibly, but it's 20, 25 minutes is really what we're going to be focusing on. That's what we should be doing. We're at our most productive at that time is to work for a short period of time, 25 minutes, take a short break, work for a 25-minute block, etc. So to make time chunks work for you, you've got to understand your priority list of tasks. If you use a to-do list is good. But it needs to be in priority order. We need to have some idea about what are you going to do first, what are you going to do second, by way of urgency and importance. If you've got tasks which are going to take longer than 25 minutes, and most of you will, not every task will take exactly 25 minutes, but if you're going to take things be longer, break it down into milestones. Just so I say, okay, if I need to finish all of this, so for example, with the lady who was writing the report just before in the run up to Christmas last year, the key thing there was it was going to be something like a 40-page report. It was a lot of work, and if you're thinking I've got to get that done in 25 minutes, it's just not going to work. But she could certainly get a summary done in 25 minutes. And so the first time chunk was get your summary done. Then have a break, then come back and break the summary down into how you're going to prove that in terms of the main content of the reports. And if you schedule it in 30-minute chunks, now show an alternative schedule for hour-long chunks as well. 25 minutes focused on a particular task, or maybe you're going to batch some tasks together, you're going to push some together. That doesn't mean multitasking. It means focusing on one thing at a time, but maybe you've got 5 emails you need to reply to. Maybe it's going to take you 10 minutes. That's 10 minutes. Then you're maybe going to declutter your desk. Then you're going to respond to a telephone call that someone's given you. Maybe that will make up 25 minutes. Get that done, then take a break. If you get the task finished before the 25 minutes, just bring your break forwards. But just doing that all day is going to burn you out. So after a full 30-minute break, so at the end of maybe the end of a 2-hour period, you take a longer break, 15 minutes. So for example, you would start by saying, what task are you going to work on? What's the outcome of that task, the quality, the standard that's required, etc. But remember Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law says that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. And if you don't believe that, then just think about the meetings that you used to hold that always used to take a certain amount of time. Why do they always take an hour? Why don't they get done in 50 minutes? Why don't they get done in 22 minutes? Because we said an hour, because Outlook tends to put things in for an hour, and it takes that time. So if we say we're going to take 25 minutes, think, what can I get done in that time? It's probably going to be at the standard that's okay. Just work towards that. But make sure you've got a balance between work and personal chunks. It's not just all about work, especially working from home. You've got to include some things, especially if you've got kids. What are your chunks going to be about homeschooling, for example? What are some of the chunks about talking to them about what their day is? That can't be done in just a 2 or 3 minute block. It's sitting down and having that conversation. And hopefully, if you've got family living with you, you view them as being important to you, in which case they need to be included as part of the time chunks. So we could start off here. We start at 8 o'clock. Work for 25 minutes. Now, this is the schedule that I would work to. I'm very much a morning person. I'm far more productive in the morning than I am in the afternoon, and certainly in the evenings. So this is my schedule, but you can work out whatever schedule you want. But try something and get some feedback so that you can then make it work for you. 25 minutes, 5-minute break. You'll see in here, and at 9:55, I take a 15-minute break. I'm back at 10 past 10, and this will work me up to lunchtime. So I'm working from 8 till 12, but I'm not working for 4 hours. I'm really working, I won't say flat out. I think that there are times when I'm not, but the aim is to work flat out for those 25-minute breaks. But then I take a lunch break. And this is something that I wouldn't always do. And certainly in terms of delivering training, you get a lunch break, but it's very difficult to switch off at that stage. This is when we can do our walks. This is when we can go outside and get out once going out of a day walk, if we choose to, or having some more in-depth conversations with people, etc. But we need to make sure we build in a decent break in there. If an hour is too long for you, make sure it's at least half an hour. It's a false economy to work through your lunch, not take a break at all, and find, because you will be far less productive, more open to distractions in the afternoon. My afternoon back at 1 o'clock, but now I'm actually going to be working for longer. I leave my longer items that I know I'm going to need to spend longer time on. I leave those for the afternoon, and I have a longer break afterwards. So 50 minutes followed by 10. I realize my productivity is going to get less and my focus gets less as the day goes on. So I do go 40, 30, 25. And at the end, I'm doing 20-minute breaks. 20-minute work with 10, 15-minute breaks as well. Now, I'm not saying this is a recipe that everyone should follow, but it is something that works for me. The key is to really start thinking about how you're going to do it. And people say, well, what can you do in 5 minutes? There's huge amounts you can do in 5 minutes. You can go to the bathroom. That's when you go to the bathroom in your 5-minute breaks. You can take the dog out. If you've got a dog, take it out for a very, very short walk, get a longer walk during the lunch break. You can go and make a drink, tea, coffee. Hopefully you'll be drinking lots of water as well. Put some laundry on. You can stretch, you can walk, simple exercises. You can see them on here. There's lots of things we can do in 5 minutes. But the beauty of 5 minutes is there's no time to get on the internet. There's no time to start exploring things. So we need to make sure that the short breaks are there to give our brain a rest. If you're into meditation, calming techniques, breathing techniques, it's a great time to do them. So when you go back to your next time chunk, you're refreshed, you're ready. So please do your best not to do any of these. Don't check your email during that time. Email can be done at lunchtime, it can be done at the end of the day. We need to move away from people sending an email and expecting an automatic response. Now, if you are expecting a certain email, you're going to keep your eye on that. But if you are consistently moving from either doing some writing or doing something on a screen to look at your emails, go back, you're constantly interrupting yourself. And it's not necessarily the interruption, it's the amount of time it takes you to get back to where you were in your thinking. It's like reading a book. If someone interrupts you when you're reading a book, you very rarely go back to where you were in that book. You may go back to the start of the paragraph. Sometimes, depending on the interruption, you may go right back to the start of the chapter, and you're basically repeating yourself again. So don't check your email. Don't look at social media. Don't go onto the internet. Don't return phone calls. Those can take place during the longer break, at lunchtime and afterwards, etc. Don't read blogs. Don't do anything complex. Give your brain a rest. Now, you shouldn't have complex interactions at all. And that's quite challenging when working from home. But they should, if it is a complex interaction with, say, a partner, wife, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, etc., or your children, those should be part of a time chunk. We should actually be saying, okay, I'm going to schedule time to do this. We have every right. If someone says, do you have a minute? Check the physiology here, the body language. If someone is massively upset, that probably will take over your priority list. But if someone says, I need some time for you, negotiate with them when that will be. And maybe that is maybe you're going to have to put off doing the next part of a particular task because you know at 11:05 you've got that time. But if you've already spoken to people about this, they should actually start speaking about, I need to have a time chunk with you. When would it become available? And if we can start to have this sort of language now, it's much easier trying to implement it when we're back in the workplace. So what are some of the reasons that that time chunks work? Well, it limits the time that the brain has to focus. So the important aspect of this is that the brain will focus on something, and when it focuses on it, it then will potentially go off into a different direction. And if it goes into that different direction, we can have a problem, because when we start with 101 things started and none of them completed. If we're working on time chunks, then the tendency to procrastinate will disappear. In fact, it gets demolished straight away. It means that we're not necessarily going to multitask. I've heard lots and lots of people saying that they can multitask. I've heard it split down gender lines, that certain genders can multitask and certain can't. I personally believe there are some people who are better at faking it than others. But think about a telephone call you're on whilst you're writing an email. Either you're not paying enough attention to the email, you're going to have to go back and do it again, or you're not listening to the telephone call. Something isn't working at the right level there. We are better off focusing on one thing at a time. And working in this, saying, I'm going to get this done. What can I get done in 25 minutes? It pushes us towards completing tasks rather than just working towards them. What can we get done? Remember Parkinson's law. You can get a lot more done. And I remember back in corporate world, before we had internet connections at home that meant you could do a lot of work at home. I remember I was so far behind in my work in terms of doing reports, keeping things up to speed, etc., because I had so many meetings that I just said to my family, I'm going into work. I'm going to work there on a Saturday. And I'd worked out how long I thought it would take. And if anyone else has done this, you'll empathize with me. I'd got in at 9 o'clock in the morning. There was nobody around. The call center was open, but there was no real other people around. I was working away. And what I thought I'd get done in 8 hours, I actually got done in about an hour and a half, because there were no interruptions. There was no distractions. There was no messages, no emails. And that's the sort of zone we've got to get into, and we've got to help other people getting into as well. So when we finish this webinar, how are you going to spend your time? You've got a certain amount of time left for today. If you're in the UK, then you're finishing around about 3 o'clock. So by the time you're taking a 5-minute break, it will be about 3:05. What tasks are you going to complete in the next 4 25-minute time chunks? What would make a big difference to you? Now, part of that might be reviewing your notes from today. It might be about having a conversation with someone about this, but just record how you get on. How was it to work focused for 25 minutes, then take a break for 5? And once you get into that, repeat it tomorrow. If you do this for a week and you record how you're getting on, then it will allow you to say, how should your schedule look? You may well say, well, I'm going to work in 1.5 blocks in the morning, followed by a half-hour break. If that works for you, go for it. If 25 minutes and 5 minutes, which is the common way of doing time chunks, works for you, then at least start with that, because our attention span tends to drop after about 15, 20 minutes. We can get it together, we can train ourselves to be at 25 minutes, but we don't really want to do too many shorter than that if we can, but base it on your own situation. Now, before we finish, I'm going to cover 2 of the biggest time wasters that we have out there, and that's emails and meetings. If we look at emails, first of all, things to do about email. Please check emails 2 times per day. Check them when you get up in the morning, possibly 3. When you first get up in the morning, lunchtime, and when you finish. Email is not something that should be immediate response. I know it's used like that in a lot of areas. We have an opportunity here working from home where nobody knows we're ignoring our emails. I've seen too many office environments where someone sends an email and they just look up and they say, have you got that email? And you just think, why don't you get up and have a conversation? Or why don't you actually respect my time and consider I might be working on something else? Please do think before you copy someone in or blind copy people in. It's one of those things that a lot of people find annoying about emails. You find yourself that you copied on everything. You read the whole email to find there's nothing for you to do. So think about that. Think really, if we were in the old world of everything that had to be printed and photocopied, would we really print and photocopy it for every single person and send it round to them? If the answer is no, we've got to think about this. If we are going to send something to people, then at least start the email with the reason why we sent it to them. So if I was sending an email to a team of 8 people, I might only have 2 people who've got to do anything. So I'd say, Chris and Mark, you've got to do actions. Everyone else is just for your information. It saves them some time. Subject lines. Most people are very good with subject lines when they compose an email. Most people are terrible when they're replying, because when we send something, to start with, the reply might be about something totally different. For example, it could be about this webinar. So an email could have come through about webinar tomorrow at 2 o'clock. If we reply to that, it makes no sense, because the webinar isn't tomorrow at 2 o'clock anymore. The webinar was today at 2 o'clock. So let's make sure that the subject line is relevant, is descriptive, to allow us to be able to see the emails in our Outlook files or our email systems, so that we can find them. But also it allows the person to decide whether it is important. And if it's not important, then no action. Then make that easy for them to understand. Switch off the bells and whistles, depending on what system you use. If you use an Outlook, for example, Microsoft Outlook, then under options, there'll be 4 things that email does to remind you, or to point out an email is there. 1, it makes a sound, which you'll only hear obviously if you've got sound cards in. At the bottom of the right-hand corner of the screen is a little grayed out image of the email pops up, just long enough to it distracts you, then it disappears. It also, if you're in Microsoft Office, there's an email system, an email icon. It looks like a tumble dryer, an orange tumble dryer. There'll be an envelope just above there. And also it does briefly change the mouse cursor. Now your cursor has got to be on show on screen, but it gets bigger and smaller. And so very few people will be aware of that. Just switch them off. They're just interruptions for you. It doesn't mean you're not going to deal with emails. It means you're going to deal with them at the appropriate time for you. And it might be in a time chunk, or it might be start, lunch, and end of the day. But just remember, 80% of new emails are less important than the task you're working on now. So why would you interrupt yourself for something that's far more likely to be less important than what you're working on? In terms of meetings, if there's no agenda, don't hold a meeting. Simple as that. If there's no agenda, it means no one can actually work out the purpose. Now, the agenda doesn't have to be written down in a standard A4 format and printed off, etc. It could just be the body of an email. This is particularly important around what I call perpetual meetings that take place the same time every day, week, or month. And that's not to say that we cancel production meetings. I think they're great, but they really should be short, 5-6 minutes long, not going into an hour and a half every single day. Weekly meetings, ask yourself, why did we start holding these? Is that reason still valid now? And if it is, by all means hold them, but make sure that you do simple things like start and finish on time. Make sure that there is an agenda that says how long things will take. And if you want to have a couple of tips to really make sure that meetings fly, do not accept from anyone when you're going through minutes of meetings or actions, I'll cover that next time. The amount of meetings that I watch where someone says, oh yeah, I did have that action, I'll pick that up next time, shouldn't be allowed. We should actually be doing what we said we would do, and then the feedback is it's already happened. We shouldn't actually be using the next meeting as a method of feeding that back. It should automatically be happening. But you can shorten meetings. Just take away the chairs. Honestly, people will not want to stand around feeling uncomfortable. Everything will still get discussed, but just take all the chairs out of a room, or take the chairs off when you're actually standing doing your webinars. Start later in the day. The amount of meetings that start, say, at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, and they go on for 2 hours. There's no way if they started at 4:30 on a Friday, they go on for 2 hours. So why do they take that time on Tuesday? Because they do. They're set up for 2 hours, and Parkinson's law comes in. So start thinking about how can we do, but certainly look at your meetings, try and reduce the amount of time you spend on them. And if there is no agenda, you shouldn't be going. It shouldn't, in fact, meetings shouldn't be taking place at all. And a real bugbear of mine is people who demand that minutes are taken of every single meeting. There are certain meetings where minutes are definitely required, anything HR-ish, anything that actually requires contractual work, etc. But by and large, what we need is actions. We need someone that's actually writing down those actions, and you can write them during the meeting. You can take a photograph of them, email them out, so people have got them at the end of a meeting. And especially if you go to any meetings where the minutes of the next meeting only come out at the start of the next meeting. I mean, what an absolute waste of time that is. So actions, not minutes. See if you can stick to those. So looking forwards, looking beyond the current situation we're in, how do you and your organization need to think about distractions? That's a key thing. What are the distractions that you're not going to, that you don't want to allow going forwards now? And then the question is, what are you going to do about it? Because someone needs to do something about it. Otherwise, there's a danger we'll go back to the old way of doing things, where in actual fact, there are things we can do now. We've had such a big change. There's nothing to stop us from changing it now. But be aware, can't be just purely selfish. Other people interrupt me. What are you going to do to respect other people's use of time? And what help and support may you need? And if there is help and support that you need, there's stuff out there. I would actually ask you now, it's 5 to 3. When we finish this, take a 5-minute break, okay, through to 3 o'clock, and then start on your first 25-minute task. Think about what that task is going to be. You had to think about that during the process already. Think about a 25-minute task and do it. And then take another 5-minute break, do another 25-minute task, etc. And just see what it looks like today. Strike while the iron is hot. Do it now. If you put it off to, I'll start till tomorrow, there's a real danger you get to tomorrow, say, I'll start tomorrow. If you don't do something immediately, when you've actually been doing some learning, there's a real danger. You just get into atrophy and it just disappears. But I would say there's opportunities if you want to. You can contact me. You can contact me through the chamber, obviously. Or you can just drop me an email, give me a phone call. I'm happy to talk through with anyone. Now, I'm happy to hold either a face-to-face through webinar or a telephone call with you. However, it will not be a repetition of this training course. It's going to have to be you've done something, you've hit an obstacle, or what's even better for me is you've had some success, you want to talk about it and see how you can sustain that. Please do not make contact and say, I spent an hour with you, Bryan. I haven't done anything with it. Could you go over it again? The answer is no. Just look through the PDF. But I would love to speak to anyone who wants to. If anyone wants to explore this any further, please just explore it and have a conversation. I do have plenty of gaps in my diary at the moment. I'm not going out very much. And although we're getting into doing a lot of webinars with people, a lot of the people we're working with have been furloughed. So I have time. Love to speak with you. Love to get some feedback from you as well. And if we manage to do that, then I look forward to speaking to you then.